Good morning to everybody. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I should perhaps start by thanking Şanar Yurdatapan and his organization for inviting me to this important event. Our friendship with Şanar dates back for many years, and when he asked me if I could make the opening statement today, I agreed, thinking that at the time of this statement, I would have no connection to any government or to any organization. Let me briefly talk about myself. I'm a Turkish diplomat who asked for retirement 4 years ago after 36 years of service, and also recently finished my job with the Black Sea Economic Corporation, as we call it, BİSEK. This is a regional organization which includes all the greater Black Sea countries that I understand will be discussed today. Therefore, only recently I'm entitled to my own opinions without creating any responsibility for any government or organization. But if you think that I will be making earth-shaking revelations today, this will not be the case. I will explain why. Besides my friendship with Şanar, the only other reason why I have accepted this offer is my firm belief that freedom of expression is the cornerstone of democratic rights and freedoms of any society. Let's remember that in its first session in 1946, before any human rights declarations adopted, the UN, United Nations General Assembly, adopted a resolution stating, I quote, "Freedom of information is a fundamental human right and the touchstone of all the freedoms to which the United States is concentrated," unquote. In my humble way, I feel quite satisfied of contributing to the democratization process in Turkey, first by serving in the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations in Geneva as the Turkish permanent representative, and later as the Secretary General of the European Union Affairs of the Turkish government. These are relatively important responsibilities for anyone dealing with the human rights in general and with the freedom of expression in particular. I'm aware that this conference is allocated to the situation of freedom of expression in Black Sea countries. As the former First Deputy Secretary General of BİSEK, I'm not in a position, unfortunately, to elaborate this topic meaningfully, since the discussion of all political issues, even the soft political issues, like human rights, are left outside the mandate of BİSEK intentionally when the BİSEK was founded. Some BİSEK members are so sensitive to such issues that they are absolutely against discussing them within BİSEK. I presume that is why none of the BİSEK member states care to respond to the invitation extended to them by this association. It seems that not only they preferred not to contribute to the subject from their perspective, of course, but also they did not even wish to listen to what the expert would say today. Despite lack of information on freedom of expression within BİSEK, let me try to bring some perspective as to the state of affairs within the member states, in different member states rather. First of all, I think we can broadly divide the BİSEK countries into two categories: those who are members of the European Union and those who are not. Although I'm unaware of some of the possible deficiencies that the first category, namely EU members, might have, by being members of the EU, one can assume that they have crossed over certain benchmarks in the field of political criteria. It is true that we still hear certain complaints within these countries with regard to human rights, including freedom of expression. But coming from government circles, I would think that they should be generally tolerable, such complaints, and there are rooms for further improvement. It is easy to assume, on the other hand, that the other 9 member states have a variety of problems in the area, which we will discuss today, some stemming from domestic circumstances, others from internal struggles or armed conflicts. Here, I am of the opinion that every country's level of relations with the European Union has a direct bearing on the situation of freedom of expression in each BSEC member. Stated differently, those member states which has closer ties to the European Union relatively has less human rights problems within their societies. Turkey is a case in point. It is not difficult to assume that today we shall be hearing, I think yesterday also, considerable amount of case studies in which Turkey was criticized or today will be criticized. After all, Turkey can still ban the YouTube. Some prosecutors still can try to prohibit certain books of renowned writers based on obscenity. What is more is the possibility of Orhan Pamuk, the Nobel Prize winner, being prosecuted due to a statement he made a few years ago. Despite all these facts, however, let me sincerely state that we have come a long way in this regard. Compared to the years of 1998-2002, when I represented Turkey at the United Nations Human Rights Commission, we have achieved considerable progress thanks to the process of accession negotiations with the European Union. During those years, I often felt as if I was a lawyer that was defending a client who killed a dozen of people with many witnesses around. It was some kind of a mission impossible. But things changed drastically after 2002, when the EU doors were opened and the hope for full membership was felt for the first time. I can say this with a certain degree of authority, since I became the person responsible from 8 reform packages the government was able to introduce until 2005. Was it enough? Absolutely not. But the effects of the EU were so visible that I started to believe that the process itself was more important than the target of full membership. So as far as I'm concerned, the correlation between the EU and human rights is a fact, and I think it's a reality. Among other factors, this observation led us in the BSEC Secretariat, where I served between 2006-2009 until a few weeks ago, to try to strengthen ties between the EU and BSEC. Starting with 2006, we took numerous initiatives in order to bring these two organizations coming closer. In April 2007, the EU became an observer to the BSEC, and finally in February 2008 in Kiev, all the foreign ministers of both the EU and BSEC met in a joint meeting and signed a joint declaration. The basis for this new relationship was a communiqué endorsed by the European Union entitled Black Sea Synergy, a new regional cooperation initiative. This is a document which comprises all aspects of relationship, including political issues like human rights and good governance, etc. Obviously, freedom of expression was a key issue which had to be taken into consideration by BSEC. Finally, the last step in this direction was another European Union communiqué, which came out this year, which was called Eastern Partnership. This covers the 3 Caucasian states, namely Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, plus Ukraine and Moldova. This document is a more focused one and envisages the improvement of bilateral relations of these countries with the European Union in every respect. In my judgment, this project covers a gap that exists in BISEC and has the potential to widen the influence of the European Union in the wider Black Sea area, thereby reducing the importance of BISEC itself. Already the so-called Eastern Partnership was met with a great enthusiasm by the 5 member states. And it seems that these countries are ready to embark upon special relations with the European Union. So it is fair to expect important improvements in the area of human rights, not in a distant future. Another important point which I have to mention is the attitude of the Russian Federation vis-à-vis these developments. Russia was rather reluctant to see closer ties with the European Union. It was the only BISEC member that did not sign the joint EU-BISEC Declaration of Kiev. The pretext was that this relationship was not based on equal terms. But in reality, Russia, I think, was concerned that political issues, including human rights, would inevitably be introduced into the domain of BISEC. Therefore, we can detect the problems of the remaining BISEC members to the period of communist regimes under the former Soviet Union. Russia is a leading BISEC country whose records on freedom of expression are rather worrisome. Particularly alarming trends include the killing of journalists and the absence of subsequent thorough and impartial investigations. Media outlets that dare to voice independent opinions are generally silenced. It is claimed that the Russian public is deprived of its right to information and debate on matters of public importance. Probably we'll be hearing about these during the course of the day. The other 2 countries in the second group within BISEC are Albania and Serbia. They both have stabilization and association agreements with the European Union. This was an important step in the improvement of human rights situation in both countries, yet they have a long way to reach to the desired level. To conclude, except the 3 EU members, all the other 9 countries are involved either in internal and bilateral conflicts or faced with terrorism. This situation creates sufficient justification to impose certain limitations to the freedom of expression. International standards limit restrictions to freedom of expression on the grounds of national security to cases in which an act is intended to incite violence and where there is a direct and immediate connection between the act and the likelihood or the occurrence of the violence. It is generally accepted that this principle is overlooked in most cases. Today, I assume that the experts coming from different BISEC countries will elaborate many cases and will harshly criticize their governments of violating the principles of freedom of expression. In the past, being on the other side of the fence, namely as a bureaucrat in the government, initially I sometimes resented the criticism leveled against us. There were times when I felt that certain reactions by some civil society organizations were unfair. But over the years, I started to believe that continuous and relentless criticisms and pressures were necessary to move and shake the establishments and to rectify the mistakes. Having said this, however, I am also of the opinion that if a government is trying in goodwill to improve the standards, that should also be acknowledged by the same civil societies that is known for their criticism. This type of attitude will certainly increase their credibility. As a final note, I wish to express my appreciation to those participants who are extremely knowledgeable with regard to conditions in their own countries and who are like detectives following every move concerning freedom of expression. Without them, we would not have even made the imperfect progress we have achieved today. Thank you.